Move along, said Tamlin, as he and Daft Donald propelled Matt from the garden. I didn't do it, cried Matt. I found your fingerprints on the laudanum bottle, said Tamlin. Matt had never heard him like this before. So cold, so bitter, and so disgusted. I did take the laudanum, but I didn't use it. They were moving rapidly through the halls with Matt's feet only brushing the floor. They arrived at Celia's apartment. Tamlin paused before opening the door. I always say, Tamlin said, breathing as hard as if he'd run a long way. I always say, the truth is best even when we find it unpleasant. Any rat in a sewer can lie. It's how rats are. It's what makes them rats. But a human doesn't run and hide in dark places because he's something more. Lying is the most personal act of cowardice there is. I'm not lying. Matt couldn't help crying, even though he knew it was a babyish thing to do. I can believe you made a mistake, Tamlin went on. The bottle said 3 drops. That's the dose for a full-grown man. But Furball was a dog. A dose like that would kill him. Did kill him. Someone else gave it to him, Matt cried. I'd feel sorry for you if I hadn't seen Maria first. And I'd feel more kindly if you stepped up and took the blame you deserve. I'm not lying. Ah, well, perhaps I'm expecting too much of you. You're confined to quarters until Maria leaves. And now is as good a time as any to tell you El Patron is leaving at the same time. And taking me with him. Matt was so stupefied he couldn't speak. He stared at Tamlin. It had to happen sometime, lad, Tamlin said more kindly. You're able to look after yourself now. If anything goes wrong, Celia can send a message. He opened the door, and Matt was swept up by Celia, who obviously had been waiting on the other side. He couldn't talk to her. As had happened when he was deeply upset before, the power of speech left him. He was 6 years old again, master of a kingdom of gristle and bone and rotting fruit, hidden beneath the sawdust, in a little room. Chapter 14. Celia's story. Matt was inside his room when Maria left. He heard the hovercraft whine as it prepared to lift off. He heard the whoosh of air and felt an eerie stir on his skin as the anti-gravity vessel passed overhead. He had never traveled in one. El Patron discouraged such things, preferring to keep his farm close to the memory of his youth. As a boy, El Patron had observed the grand estate of the wealthy rancher who owned his village. He remembered a statue of a winged baby and a fountain tiled in blue and green. He remembered the peacocks that haunted the garden. In every respect, he told Matt, he tried to duplicate that memory. Only, of course, being vastly more wealthy, he could have dozens of statues, fountains, and gardens. The Alacrán Estancia was laid out over a large area. No part of the house was taller than 1 story. The walls were a brilliant white, the roofs of fine red tile. Modern conveniences were kept to a minimum, except in special areas, like the hospital. Thus, Celia cooked over a wood-burning stove when El Patron was visiting because he liked the smell of burning mesquite. At other times, she was allowed to use microwaves. The gardens were cooled with fine sprays of water, and the rooms, for the most part, depended on shaded verandas to tame the hot desert air. But during the annual birthday party, modern conveniences came out. The famous celebrities would have been miserable without their air conditioning and entertainment centers. Not that El Patron cared whether they were miserable. He merely wanted to impress people. Matt listened for the purr of El Patron's limousine. The old man preferred to travel by road. If it had been possible, he would have gone by horse, but his bones were far too brittle to attempt such a thing. He would sit in the back with Tam Lin for company. Daft Donald would drive. They would whisk along the long, shimmering highway to El Padrón's other house in the Chiricahua Mountains. Matt stared up at the ceiling. He was too depressed to eat or watch TV. All he could do was play out the events of the past few days in his mind. He went over them again and again. If only he hadn't put Tom at the baby table. If only he hadn't made Maria kiss him in front of the others. If only he hadn't gone to the hospital. The regrets piled thickly on one another until Matt's thoughts were running around in his head like a hamster on a wheel. Everyone thought he'd poisoned Furball. His fingerprints were on the bottle, and he'd left a note, a signed note. How dumb can you get? In Maria's room. Matt had to admit the evidence against him was pretty good. Tom must have seen him come out of the pump house and decided to finish the job he'd started when he dumped Furball into the toilet. But how did Tom use the laudanum without leaving his fingerprints on the bottle? Round and round went Matt's thoughts. Squeak went the wheel in his mind. He heard the limousine start up, the distant slam of a door, the fading roar of the engine. So, El Patrón was gone now, and Tam Lin. Matt grieved for him. Any rat in a sewer can lie, Tam Lin had said. It's how rats are. But a human doesn't run and hide in dark places because he's something more. Matt thought he could make Maria understand if he ever got to see her. She'd forgive him because he was a dumb animal and didn't know any better. But Tam Lin had called Matt a human and expected much more from him. Humans, Matt realized, were a lot harder to forgive. For the first time, he saw a huge difference between the way the bodyguard treated him and how everyone else did. Tam Lin talked about courage and loyalty. He let Matt do dangerous things on their expeditions and go off by himself to explore. He treated Matt as an equal. Tam Lin often talked to him about his childhood in Scotland, as though Matt were another adult. It wasn't like El Patrón's memories, which tended to fall into a rut. Matt had those stories memorized right down to the last word. Tam Lin's stories were about the difficult decisions you made to become a man. I was a proper fool, the bodyguard had said. Turned my back on my family, ran with a rough crowd, and did the thing that brought me here. What that thing was, Tam Lin never revealed. At the memory of those picnics, tears came to Matt's eyes and rolled down his cheeks. He made no sound. He had learned that safety lay in silence. But he couldn't stop the tears. Yet in the midst of his sorrow, Matt found a glimmer of hope. Someone, out of all the people who thought he was no better than a dog, believed he could be something more. And I will be, Matt promised, as he stared up at the blurry ceiling.